My name is William, and tonight we enter the English court at the point where a king's private loyalty became a public wound. Edward II inherited a crown built on war, ceremony, and hard expectations. Yet beside him stood Piers Gaveston, a favourite whose rise was so dazzling, so resented, and so impossible to ignore that England's great lords began to see one friendship as a threat to the realm itself. This was not a court built for softness. The Plantagenet world valued lineage, land, command, and honour. A king was meant to reward men carefully, listen to the nobility, defend his borders, and behave as the visible centre of order. Affection could exist, of course, but it was expected to remain beneath the surface of duty. Edward did not keep it there. Piers Gaveston came from Gascon nobility, not from the highest rank of England's ancient houses. He was graceful, clever, confident, and gifted at courtly performance. He could ride, speak, dress, and entertain in a way that made him shine. To Edward, he seems to have offered warmth, ease, and company in a world where kings were rarely allowed to be ordinary men. Here is the detail that matters. Gaveston's danger was not simply that Edward loved his company. It was that Edward raised him beyond what the political world could bear. Titles, gifts, lands, and access gathered around him. When the king gave Gaveston the earldom of Cornwall, one of the greatest honours in the kingdom, the message was impossible to miss. The favourite had been placed among the greatest. Imagine Westminster. By candlelight, the smell of wax and damp wool, heavy cloaks brushing stone passages, clerks carrying sealed documents, noblemen watching each gesture with cold attention. A smile from the king could become evidence. A private word could become a rumour. In such a place, closeness was never only closeness. It was power. Men saw it. Women heard it. Clerks wrote it down. Nothing near the king stayed small for long. Edward's lords felt insulted. Some were older, richer, and far more established than Gaveston. They had fought, inherited, married, and bargained for status over generations. Now they saw a young favourite move near the throne with a confidence that looked, to them, like mockery. Worse still, Gaveston was said to have given cutting nicknames to great nobles. Whether every report is fair or sharpened by hostility, the effect was poisonous. And here is the intriguing part most people miss. The scandal was not only emotional, it was legal. The barons were asking a terrifying question. If the king could lift one favourite above the old nobility, ignore counsel, and turn private loyalty into public policy, where did lawful rule end and personal will begin? Edward had a queen, Isabella of France, and a kingdom that expected careful balance. His marriage carried state weight. His barons expected a voice. His people needed stable government, yet again and again. Gaveston's presence seemed to draw royal attention into a narrower circle. The court began to feel less like a shared realm and more like a chamber with one door, and Gaveston held the key. Pressure mounted. Gaveston was exiled more than once, and more than once Edward brought him back, or worked for his return. This repeated rhythm made the crisis worse. Had Edward yielded fully, the anger might have cooled. Had Gaveston stayed away, the court might have healed. Instead, their bond became a test of authority. Each return looked like defiance. It was as if Edward was saying that the crown, not the council, would decide whom he could trust. Picture the ships, the letters, the anxious messengers moving between coast and court. A man banished by the kingdom, returning through the king's desire. A ruler insisting on the companion. Others told him to surrender. There is something deeply human in that stubbornness, but in a king it became grave. private refusal became public revolt. The barons forced reforms known as the Ordinance, designed to restrain royal power and remove the favourite. These were not the complaints of wounded pride alone. They were an attempt to bind a king who seemed to many to have forgotten the boundary between affection and government. Edward's love of favour or loyalty or company had become a matter of state. Yet the truth is even more astonishing. Gaveston himself may not have held the kind of deep, real power his enemies feared. He was not the only cause of England's troubles. War, finance, poor counsel, noble rivalry, and royal temperament all mattered. But symbols can become more powerful than facts. Gaveston became the living symbol of everything the barons hated in Edward's rule. Then came the breaking point. Gaveston was captured by the king's opponents. Among the leading figures stood Thomas of Lancaster, a powerful cousin of the king and one of the greatest lords in England. The decision that followed changed the crisis forever. Gaveston was killed by noble authority outside the king's protection. The favourite was gone, but the wound remained open. A death meant to end the quarrel gave it a sharper life. For Edward, this was more than political defeat. It was personal devastation. The man he had defended against the kingdom had been taken from him. The crown had failed to protect the person nearest to his trust. If the barons hoped this would restore order, they misread the heart of the king. Loss rarely makes power gentler. It often hardens it. The realm entered a darker mood. Trust between king and nobility had been shattered. Edward could not forget what had been done. The barons could not forget what they believed he had forced them to do. Public duty had collided with private devotion, and neither side came away innocent. The court became a place where old wounds walked in rich clothing, and fear, once named, does not rest. No one felt safe. This is where the story becomes larger than Gaveston. Edward's reign never escaped the pattern. Later favourites would rise. Later resentments would gather. His authority would be challenged again, and the kingdom would endure further shame and fracture. Gaveston's fall did not end the problem. It revealed the shape of it. What does this tell us about Edward? It would be easy to call him foolish and leave the matter there, but history is rarely so tidy. He was a king trapped between the need for public majesty and the hunger for private loyalty. He seems to have wanted a companion who did not treat him only as an office. Yet the crown cannot love without consequence. The throne turns affection into appointment, access, and alarm. And what of Gaveston? He has often been remembered through the anger of his enemies. Perhaps he was arrogant. Perhaps he enjoyed provoking men who already despised him. Perhaps he was simply too brilliant, too close, and too visible for a court built on jealous honour. Whatever the truth, his tragedy was that the king's favour lifted him higher than the political world was willing to allow. There is a quiet sadness in this story. The objects of court life seem beautiful from a distance. Velvet, carved wood, polished silver, banners, horses, seals in red wax. But beneath them lay a brutal rule. The king's heart was not his own. Every preference had an audience. Every gift had a meaning. Every beloved companion created enemies. By the end, the devotion between Edward and Gaveston had ignited something far beyond personal scandal. It gave the barons a focus for resistance. It exposed the weakness of royal judgment. It turned court jealousy into armed politics. And it taught England a grave lesson, that a king who would not govern his affections might have his government taken from him. So was Piers Gaveston the ruin of Edward's early reign, or was he the mirror that showed the kingdom what was already broken? I think the answer lies somewhere more painful. Gaveston did not create England's fragile politics, but his closeness to the king made that fragility impossible to hide. He became the face of a deeper fear, that personal devotion could overpower public duty. If this story made you see Edward II differently, tell me what you think below. Was his loyalty to Gaveston a human act of love and trust, or a royal failure that no kingdom could survive? If you found this journey moving, leave a like, and join me again for more stories where honor, power, and heartbreak meet behind palace doors. History often hides its hardest truths in the moment when private devotion asks more than public duty can ever give.